In a world where speaking up gets you noticed and staying quiet makes you invisible, Sarah Martinez had mastered the art of being unseen. For 3 years, she cleaned floors, emptied trash bins, and wiped down computer screens at the most secure military base in Nevada while everyone around her treated her like a ghost. They saw the cleaning uniform, the downcast eyes, the trembling hands when anyone spoke to her, and they decided she was nothing more than a scared girl who couldn't even ask for a raise. But what they didn't know was that Sarah spoke 7 languages fluently, held 2 engineering degrees from MIT, and had been recruited by a secret government program that had gone horribly wrong. What they couldn't see was that every night, she memorized security codes, mapped out classified systems, and documented everything happening in the base's most protected areas. The soldiers laughed when she stuttered trying to ask for extra cleaning supplies. The officers barely glanced up when she wheeled her cart past their open office doors. The technicians made jokes about the mute girl who cleaned their keyboards without saying a word. They had no idea that their mockery was about to become the biggest security breach in military history. And it would all start with a single moment when Sarah would finally break her silence, not with words, but with a shutdown sequence that would leave the entire base defenseless. This is the true story of how underestimating someone can cost you everything, and how the quietest person in the room might just be the most dangerous one of all. Sarah Martinez pushed her cleaning cart down the sterile hallway of Desert Mountain Air Force Base, the wheels squeaking against the polished concrete floor. The sound echoed through the corridor, but nobody paid attention. To the hundreds of military personnel who passed her each day, she was just another piece of background noise, as forgettable as the humming of the air conditioning system. She kept her head down, dark hair falling across her face like a curtain, hiding the sharp intelligence in her brown eyes. Her janitor's uniform hung loose on her small frame, making her appear even more insignificant than she already felt. Or at least, that's what everyone assumed she felt. "Hey, mute girl," called out Sergeant Danny Rodriguez as he walked past with 2 other soldiers. "Make sure you get those coffee stains out of the break room. Some of us actually have to use that space." The other soldiers chuckled, and one of them added, "Think she even understands English? I've never heard her say more than 2 words at a time. Probably just, 'Yes, sir,' and 'Sorry, sir,'" Rodriguez replied, and their laughter faded as they turned the corner. Sarah's grip tightened on the card handle, but she didn't respond. She never responded. For the past 3 years, she had perfected the role of the invisible cleaning lady, the woman so timid and unremarkable that people felt comfortable saying anything around her. They discussed classified missions while she emptied their trash. They left sensitive documents on their desks while she dusted around them. They typed in security codes while she cleaned their computer screens. What none of them knew was that Sarah Martinez had graduated summa cum laude from MIT with degrees in computer engineering and cybersecurity. She spoke English, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, Mandarin, German, and French fluently. She had been recruited by the CIA straight out of college for a deep cover operation that was supposed to last 6 months, but had stretched into years because of bureaucratic complications and changing priorities. The original mission had been simple: infiltrate Desert Mountain Air Force Base as a cleaning contractor and gather intelligence on a new weapons system being developed there. But 6 months had turned into a year, and then 2, and then 3, with her handlers telling her to maintain cover while they sorted out political issues with other agencies. During that time, Sarah had mapped every inch of the base, memorized rotation schedules, identified key personnel, and gained access to systems that most people with top-secret clearance couldn't even get near. She had become so good at being invisible that she could walk into the most secure areas of the base with her cleaning cart, and security guards would wave her through without a second glance. But the mission had taken its toll. 3 years of being treated like she was stupid, worthless, and invisible had started to wear on her psyche. Even though she knew it was all an act, the constant mockery and dismissal had begun to feel real. There were days when she caught herself believing she really was just a scared cleaning lady, when the brilliant mind she had cultivated at MIT felt like a distant memory. Today was one of those days. As she wheeled her cart toward the command and control center, she could hear familiar voices from behind the partially open door of Colonel James Harrison's office. "I'm telling you, Harrison, we need to update our security protocols," General Patricia Vance was saying. "The brass in Washington thinks we've gotten too comfortable." "Our security is fine," Harrison replied dismissively. "We've had the same cleaning crew for 3 years, and Half of them barely speak English. The day staff all have clearances. I'm not worried about some janitor figuring out our defense systems. It's not just about the cleaning staff. It's about complacency. When people get too comfortable, they make mistakes. Sarah slowed her cart as she passed the door, pretending to organize her cleaning supplies. Through the gap, she could see Harrison leaning back in his chair, feet up on his desk. General, with all due respect, our systems are locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Even if someone wanted to cause trouble, they'd need to know programming languages that most of our own technicians don't understand. Plus, we've got biometric scanners, rotating security codes, and multiple authentication levels. A janitor with a mop isn't going to bring down Desert Mountain. General Vance sighed. I hope you're right. But I'm implementing new background checks for all service personnel anyway. And I want updated protocols for anyone with building access. Fine, but you're wasting time and money. The biggest security risk we have is Specialist Chen leaving her computer unlocked when she goes to lunch. Both officers laughed, and Sarah continued past the door, but their words echoed in her mind. They were so confident in their security, so sure that someone like her could never pose a threat. If they only knew that she had already identified 17 different ways to compromise their systems, and that she had been documenting everything for her eventual extraction. But extraction kept getting delayed. 3 months ago, her CIA handler had told her to prepare for extraction within weeks. 2 months ago, it was delayed due to budget issues. Last month, she was told that the operation had been transferred to a different division, and they needed time to review her intelligence before bringing her in. Meanwhile, she continued to clean floors and empty trash while military personnel discussed state secrets around her like she wasn't even there. As she entered the command and control center, Sarah nodded to the security guard, Corporal Mike Torres, who barely looked up from his magazine. Afternoon, Sarah, he mumbled, hitting the button to unlock the inner door without even checking her ID badge. This was exactly the kind of complacency General Vance had been worried about, but it worked in Sarah's favor. The command and control center was the nerve center of the base, filled with banks of computers, communication equipment, and multiple large screens displaying everything from weather data to satellite imagery. During her first year, it had taken her months to figure out how to get regular access to this room. Now, she cleaned here 3 times a week, and the technicians treated her like furniture. Hey, Sarah, can you empty this trash later? Asked Technical Sergeant Maria Fernandez, pointing to an overflowing wastebasket without looking away from her screen. We're in the middle of a system update. Sarah nodded and mumbled, yes, ma'am, in the timid voice she had perfected. She began dusting the computers along the far wall, moving slowly and methodically while keeping her eyes and ears open. The system update Fernandez was working on was particularly interesting. Sarah could see code scrolling across multiple screens, and she recognized it as a security protocol update for the base's main defense systems. She had been tracking this update for weeks, knowing that it would likely change access codes and authentication procedures. What made it even more interesting was that Fernandez was simultaneously running diagnostics on the emergency shutdown protocol, the system designed to lock down all base operations in case of attack or security breach. Sarah had been trying to fully understand this system for months, and today she was getting a front-row seat to watch how it worked. This is going to take forever, complained Sergeant Billy Watson from his workstation. Why do we have to update everything at once? Orders from Washington, Fernandez replied. They want all systems running the new security protocols by end of week. I hate these manual override procedures. You have to enter like 15 different codes just to access the main menu. Sarah's ears perked up as Watson began typing, and she positioned herself to dust a computer screen that gave her a clear view of his monitor. She watched as he entered a series of codes, each one immediately disappearing from the screen as it was accepted by the system. But Sarah had a photographic memory, a skill that had served her well at MIT and was invaluable in her current situation. She memorized each code as Watson typed it, filing the information away with thousands of other details she had collected over the past 3 years. There, Watson said finally. That should do it. Now we just have to wait for the system to process all the updates. How long? Asked another technician. Maybe an hour. Good thing it's Friday afternoon. We can let it run over the weekend. As the technicians settled in to wait, Sarah continued her cleaning routine, dusting keyboards and monitors while they chatted about weekend plans and complained about their supervisors. To them, she was just part of the background, no more noteworthy than the air conditioning or the fluorescent lights. But Sarah was processing everything she observed, cross-referencing it with information she had gathered previously, and building a complete picture of the base's security infrastructure. She now knew the emergency shutdown codes, understood the new authentication procedures, and had mapped out the relationships between different computer systems. As she worked, her mind wandered to the conversation she had overheard between Harrison and General Vance. They were so confident that someone like her could never threaten their security. They saw her uniform, her timid demeanor, and her apparent inability to speak up for herself, and they concluded she was harmless. They had no idea that their assumption was the very thing that had given her access to information that even some of their own officers couldn't obtain. They had created their own security vulnerability by deciding that certain people weren't worth watching carefully. Sarah finished dusting the workstations and moved to empty wastebaskets, a task that often yielded interesting intelligence. People threw away draft documents, printed emails, and notes containing sensitive information, assuming that trash was just trash. Today's collection was particularly valuable. She found a printed email about upcoming personnel changes, including the temporary reassignment of several key security officers. She also discovered a handwritten note with what appeared to be backup codes for one of the main computer systems. As she worked, Sarah became aware that one of the technicians, Specialist David Kim, was watching her more closely than usual. When she looked up, he quickly looked away, but she could feel his attention returning to her several times over the next few minutes. Kim was newer than most of the other technicians, having arrived at the base only 6 months ago. He was quiet and observant, traits that made Sarah slightly nervous. In her experience, the people who paid attention were the ones most likely to notice something that didn't fit. "Hey, Sarah," Kim said suddenly, causing her to freeze. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up at him with what she hoped was an expression of mild confusion and nodded. "I've been working here for 6 months, and I've noticed that you clean the same areas on the same days every week. You've got like a perfect schedule. How do you keep track of all that?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Most people never paid enough attention to her routine to notice patterns, and those who did usually attributed it to her supervisor's planning rather than her own organization. She stammered slightly, staying in character. My supervisor makes schedule for me. I just follow what they tell me." Kim nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer. "Your supervisor must be really organized. I can barely keep track of my own work schedule." Sarah mumbled something noncommittal and returned to her cleaning, but she made a mental note to be more careful around Kim. If he was observant enough to notice her routine, he might be observant enough to notice other things that didn't quite fit. As her shift neared its end, Sarah finished her work in the command and control center and prepared to return her cleaning supplies to the storage room. The technicians were still waiting for their system update to complete, and the atmosphere in the room had become more relaxed as the week wound down. Same time Monday, Sarah, Fernandez called out as she left, the same casual dismissal Sarah had grown accustomed to. Walking back through the corridors of the base, Sarah reflected on everything she had learned that day. The new security protocols, the emergency shutdown codes, the personnel changes, and dozens of other small details that would all go into her next intelligence report. But she also thought about Kim's questions and General Vance's concerns about security complacency. The mission that was supposed to have lasted 6 months had already stretched into 3 years, and Sarah was beginning to wonder if her extraction would ever come. More troubling was the realization that she was starting to lose herself in the role she had been playing. Some days, the brilliant MIT graduate felt like a fiction, and the scared cleaning lady felt real. The constant mockery and dismissal were taking a psychological toll that she hadn't anticipated when she accepted the mission. As she locked her cleaning cart in the storage room and prepared to leave for the weekend, Sarah made a decision. She would give her handlers 1 more month to extract her. If they continued to delay, she would have to consider taking matters into her own hands. After all, she now had everything she needed to shut down the entire base if necessary. The only question was whether she would ever need to use that knowledge. What she didn't know was that in 1 month's time, that question would be answered in a way that would shock everyone who had ever underestimated the quiet woman with the cleaning cart. 3 weeks later, Sarah's world began to unravel in ways she never could have anticipated. It started on a Monday morning when she arrived at the base to find Specialist Kim waiting for her in the cleaning supply room. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and his expression was serious rather than casual. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Sarah's heart rate spiked, but she maintained her cover. "Hi." Sorry. Did I do something wrong with cleaning? Kim closed the door behind her and activated a small electronic device that Sarah recognized as a signal jammer. Her blood ran cold as she realized that this conversation was about to become very dangerous. Cut the act, Agent Martinez. We need to discuss your situation. The use of her real name and title hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her carefully constructed identity began crumbling around her as she stared at Kim, trying to process how he could possibly know who she really was. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, still trying to maintain her cover even though she knew it was probably useless. Kim pulled out a tablet and showed her a photograph of herself from her MIT graduation, followed by what appeared to be CIA personnel files. Sarah Elena Martinez, MIT class of 2018, recruited by the CIA in 2019 for deep cover operations. Current mission: intelligence gathering at Desert Mountain Air Force Base under the identity of contracted cleaning personnel. Sarah's legs felt weak, and she had to grip the edge of a supply shelf to steady herself. Who are you? Special Agent David Kim, FBI Counterintelligence Division. I've been assigned to investigate potential security breaches at this base, and your operation came to our attention during a routine review of CIA activities. The room seemed to spin around Sarah as the implications of Kim's revelation sank in. If the FBI was investigating her operation, it meant that either something had gone wrong with her mission, or worse, she had been burned by her own agency. I'm conducting authorized intelligence gathering under official CIA sanction, she said, dropping the cleaning lady act entirely. If you have questions about my mission, you need to contact my handlers. Kim's expression grew grimmer. That's the problem. When we reached out to the CIA to verify your operation, they denied having any active agents at this base. According to their official records, your mission was terminated 8 months ago, and you should have been extracted at that time. The words hit Sarah like a sledgehammer. 8 months ago was when her handlers had started giving her excuses about delays in extraction. She had been continuing her mission under the assumption that the delays were due to bureaucratic complications, but, apparently, the CIA had already written her off. That's impossible, she said, though even as she spoke, she could feel the truth settling in her stomach like a lead weight. I've been receiving regular communications from my handlers. They've been directing my intelligence gathering activities. Kim showed her another document on his tablet. Agent Martinez, the CIA has no record of communications with you for the past 8 months. Your official status in their system is listed as missing, presumed compromised. Sarah sat down heavily on a cleaning supply box, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what Kim was telling her. If the CIA thought she was missing, then who had she been communicating with? Who had been receiving her intelligence reports? And why had they been directing her to continue gathering information? Someone's been impersonating your handlers, Kim continued. We've been monitoring communications coming in and out of this base, and we've identified several encrypted transmissions that appear to be intelligence reports leaving the facility. When we traced them back, they weren't going to CIA servers. Where were they going? That's what we're trying to figure out. The transmissions are being routed through multiple proxy servers, but our analysis suggests they're ultimately ending up in foreign hands, possibly Russian or Chinese intelligence services. The full scope of what had happened to her began to dawn on Sarah. She hadn't been conducting an extended CIA operation. She had been unknowingly working as a spy for a foreign government, feeding them classified information for 8 months. This is impossible, she said again, but with less conviction. I followed all the proper protocols. I verified my handlers' identities using established authentication procedures. Authentication procedures that were compromised, Kim replied. Whoever did this had inside knowledge of CIA operations. They knew exactly how to maintain your cover and keep you reporting without triggering suspicion. Sarah felt sick. For 8 months, she had been gathering intelligence on American military operations and transmitting it to foreign agents. She had unknowingly become a traitor to her own country. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you, Kim said. Right now, you're technically guilty of espionage against the United States, even though it was unintentional. But we're more interested in finding out who's behind this operation and shutting it down. You want me to keep working for them? We want you to help us identify them. You've been in contact with these people for 8 months. You know their communication methods, their intelligence requirements, and their operational procedures. With your help, we can trace this back to its source. Sarah's mind was reeling, but she could see the logic in Kim's proposal. She was the only person who had direct access to whoever was running this rogue operation. If the FBI was going to shut it down, they would need her cooperation. But there's another problem, Kim continued. Our investigation has revealed that this base is being targeted for a major operation in the near future. Based on intercepted communications, we believe someone is planning to use the intelligence you've provided to launch an attack or sabotage operation against Desert Mountain. What kind of attack? We don't know yet, but the timing suggests it will happen soon, possibly within the next week or two. Sarah thought about all the information she had gathered over the past 3 years. Security protocols, personnel schedules, system vulnerabilities, emergency procedures. If someone was planning an operation against the base, she had unknowingly provided them with everything they would need to succeed. I need to contact my handlers, she said. If there's going to be an operation, they'll probably want updated intelligence beforehand. That's exactly what we're hoping. We want you to maintain contact with them and gather as much information as possible about their plans. But from now on, everything you do will be coordinated with the FBI. Kim handed her a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. This will allow you to communicate with my team securely. We'll be monitoring all your transmissions to your handlers, and we'll be tracking their responses. Do not deviate from our instructions unless it's absolutely necessary for maintaining your cover. Sarah took the device with trembling hands. Her entire world had shifted in the space of 15 minutes. She was no longer a CIA agent conducting an authorized mission. She was now an FBI asset trying to prevent an attack on an American military base while simultaneously gathering evidence against foreign intelligence agents. Agent Martinez, Kim said, his voice softening slightly. I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand that thousands of lives could be at stake here. If someone is planning to attack this base using the intelligence you've provided, you might be the only person who can stop it. Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she was ready for the responsibility Kim was placing on her shoulders. She had spent 3 years perfecting the role of an invisible cleaning lady, and now she was being asked to become a double agent working against people who had manipulated her for months. There's one more thing, Kim said. As far as anyone on this base is concerned, I'm still just Specialist Kim, and you're still just the cleaning lady. We can't risk compromising this investigation by changing the established dynamic. You need to continue your normal routine while gathering intelligence on the side. How do I explain why we were talking? Kim smiled slightly. I asked you to clean my workstation more thoroughly. You were embarrassed about missing some dust on my keyboard. Despite everything, Sarah almost smiled at the simplicity of the cover story. After 3 years of being treated like she was invisible, it made perfect sense that any interaction with her would be forgotten within minutes. As Kim prepared to leave, he turned back to her one more time. Agent Martinez, I want you to know that the FBI recognizes the sacrifice you've made for your country. 3 years of deep cover is longer than anyone should have to maintain an identity like this. When this is over, we'll make sure you get the recognition and support you deserve. After Kim left, Sarah sat alone in the supply room for several minutes, trying to process everything that had happened. Her hands were shaking, and she could feel the careful psychological barriers she had built around her real identity beginning to crumble. For 3 years, she had survived by compartmentalizing her life. Sarah Martinez, the MIT graduate, was locked away in one part of her mind, while Sarah, the cleaning lady, occupied the day-to-day reality. It was the only way to maintain sanity while living a lie for so long. But now the barriers between those identities were breaking down. The cleaning lady was about to become a double agent, and the MIT graduate was going to have to figure out how to outsmart foreign intelligence operatives while maintaining a cover that had become second nature. As she prepared to start her normal cleaning routine, Sarah realized that the next few weeks would either vindicate her 3 years of sacrifice or destroy everything she had worked for. Either way, the invisible cleaning lady was about to become the most important person on the base. She just hoped she was ready for what came next. Later that day, as Sarah cleaned her way through the administrative offices, she found herself looking at familiar faces with new eyes. Colonel Harrison, who had been so dismissive of security concerns, was now a potential target. General Vance, who had worried about complacency, had been proven right in ways she couldn't have imagined. But it was the enlisted personnel who worried Sarah most. Sergeant Rodriguez, who called her Mute Girl, had no idea that foreign agents might be planning an operation that could put his life at risk. The technicians in the command and control center, who joked about her inability to speak English, were sitting on top of systems that someone might be preparing to attack. These people had mocked her, dismissed her, and treated her like she was invisible for 3 years. But they were also her countrymen, and she was possibly the only person who could protect them from what was coming. As she emptied waste baskets and dusted computers, Sarah began mentally preparing for the most dangerous phase of her career. She had thought the hardest part was maintaining her cover while gathering intelligence. But that was nothing compared to what she was about to attempt. She was going to have to become a spy spying on spies, all while pretending to be a simple cleaning lady who couldn't even ask for a raise without stuttering. The irony wasn't lost on her. After 3 years of being underestimated and ignored, she was about to discover just how dangerous it could be when the quietest person in the room finally decided to act. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of careful deception and mounting tension. Sarah maintained her cleaning routine while secretly coordinating with Agent Kim and his FBI team, who had established a surveillance post in an unused maintenance building on the base perimeter. Her first communication with her supposed handlers after Kim's revelation was terrifying. Sarah sent a routine intelligence report through her normal encrypted channels, but this time she included subtle markers that Kim's team had designed to help track the transmission's ultimate destination. The response came within hours, and it chilled her to the bone. Her handlers were requesting specific information about the emergency shutdown protocol she had observed 3 weeks earlier. They wanted detailed schematics of the system, including backup codes and manual override procedures. They're planning to shut down the base's defenses, Kim explained during a brief meeting in the supply room. Whatever operation they're planning, they want to make sure the base can't respond effectively. Sarah had been thinking the same thing. The emergency shutdown protocol was designed to lock down all base operations in case of external attack, but it could also be used to disable defensive systems and communication networks. If foreign agents gained control of that system, they could essentially blind and paralyze Desert Mountain while conducting whatever operation they had planned. The problem is, I actually do have the information they're asking for, Sarah said. I memorized the codes when I watched the technicians update the system. If I don't provide what they want, they might become suspicious. Then, we give them what they want. But we make sure it's wrong, Kim replied. You'll provide codes that look legitimate, but will trigger security alerts if anyone tries to use them. It was a dangerous game. Sarah had to provide enough accurate information to maintain her handlers' trust while secretly sabotaging their operation. One mistake could expose her as a double agent and potentially trigger whatever attack they were planning. Over the next several days, Sarah carefully crafted a response that included mostly accurate technical specifications, but with subtle errors in the critical access codes. She also included additional security information that Kim's team hoped would help them track down the operations command structure. But as she prepared to transmit the information, Sarah received an unexpected communication from her handlers. They were implementing new security protocols and wanted to verify her identity through a video call. The request sent panic through both Sarah and Kim's team. In 3 years of operation, Sarah's handlers had never requested visual confirmation of her identity. The sudden change suggested they might be getting suspicious, or worse, they might be preparing to eliminate her as a security risk. We can't risk a video call, Kim said. If they see you in real time, they might be able to identify you through facial recognition or other means. We need to find a way to avoid it. Sarah spent that night lying awake, trying to figure out how to refuse the video call without raising suspicion. Her handlers had always accepted her reports without question, treating her like a reliable but expendable asset. The sudden interest in visual verification was deeply troubling. The solution came to her the next morning as she was cleaning the base medical facility. She would claim to have been injured on the job, making a video call impossible due to facial injuries that would require her to remain bandaged. It was a risky deception, but it worked. Her handlers accepted her explanation and agreed to continue with text-based communications while she recovered from her supposed accident. Sarah submitted her modified intelligence report, and Kim's team began monitoring communication networks for any attempt to use the sabotaged access codes. Meanwhile, Sarah's daily routine on the base became increasingly surreal. She continued to clean floors and empty trash while secretly watching for signs of the impending operation. Every new face made her nervous. Every deviation from normal routine could be a sign that the attack was beginning. The psychological strain was enormous. For 3 years, Sarah had lived a double life, but at least she had believed she was serving her country. Now she was living a triple life, playing roles within roles while trying to prevent an attack that she had inadvertently helped plan. The worst part was the continued mockery from base personnel. Sergeant Rodriguez still called her mute girl when he wanted her to clean something. The technicians still made jokes about her inability to speak English. Colonel Harrison still dismissed her as too stupid to be a security risk. But now their casual cruelty felt different. These people were making fun of someone who was literally risking her life to protect them, and they had no idea. Their ignorance, which had once been useful for maintaining her cover, now felt like salt in an open wound. Everything changed on a Thursday morning when Sarah arrived at work to find unusual activity in the command and control center. Extra security personnel were present, and several technicians she didn't recognize were working on the main computer systems. "What's happening?" she asked Corporal Torres at the security checkpoint, maintaining her timid cleaning lady persona. "Some kind of system upgrade," he replied without much interest. "They brought in outside contractors to work on the computers. Probably going to be like this all week." Sarah's blood ran cold. Outside contractors working on the main systems was exactly the kind of scenario that could provide cover for a cyber attack. She needed to get inside the command center and assess what was happening, but the increased security presence made that much more dangerous. She spent the morning cleaning other areas of the base while trying to figure out how to gain access to the command center without arousing suspicion. As she worked, she observed the comings and goings of the supposed contractors. They looked professional enough, but something about their behavior seemed off. Real contractors would typically check in with base security multiple times, ask questions about procedures, and generally seem somewhat overwhelmed by working in a military environment. These people moved through the base like they already knew exactly where everything was and how everything worked. During her lunch break, Sarah found a private moment to contact Kim using her secure device. She described what she had observed and expressed her concern that the operation might already be underway. "We've been monitoring the contractors," Kim replied. "Their credentials check out, but we're running deeper background checks now. Continue your normal routine and try to get visual confirmation of what they're doing in the command center." That afternoon, Sarah approached the command center with her cleaning cart, but she was stopped at the inner security door by a guard she didn't recognize. "Sorry, cleaning services are suspended in this area until further notice," the guard said. "But I suppose to clean today," Sarah replied in her practiced broken English. "Sergeant Fernandez, she get angry if I don't clean computers." "Sergeant Fernandez isn't here today. She's been temporarily reassigned. The contractors are handling all maintenance in this area." Sarah's heart sank. Fernandez was one of the most experienced technicians on the base and would never have been reassigned during a major system upgrade unless someone wanted her out of the way. She spent the rest of the day trying to gather information about what was happening in the command center, but the increased security made it nearly impossible. The few glimpses she could get through windows showed the contractors working intensively on multiple computer systems, but she couldn't determine what they were actually doing. That evening, Sarah received another communication from her handlers, and this one made her blood run cold. They were requesting a detailed layout of the base's underground tunnel system, including access points and security measures. The tunnel system was one of Desert Mountain's most closely guarded secrets. It connected critical facilities and provided secure movement routes during emergencies. If foreign agents gained access to those tunnels, they could potentially reach any part of the base without being detected by surface security. More troubling was the fact that Sarah actually knew about the tunnel system. During her 3 years of cleaning, she had occasionally been assigned to maintenance areas that connected to the tunnels, and her photographic memory had automatically cataloged the layout information. "They're escalating," Kim said when Sarah reported the request. "First they wanted the shutdown codes, now they want tunnel access. This is starting to look like preparation for a physical infiltration of the base. Should I provide the information? We don't have a choice. If you refuse now, they'll know something is wrong. But we're going to modify the layout information just like we did with the access codes. We'll give them tunnels that lead to dead ends or security checkpoints." As Sarah prepared another carefully modified intelligence report, she couldn't shake the feeling that events were accelerating beyond anyone's control. The contractors in the command center, the reassignment of experienced personnel, and the increasingly specific intelligence requests all pointed to an operation that was entering its final phase. But what terrified Sarah most was the realization that she might be the only person on the base who understood what was really happening. Colonel Harrison was still confident in his security measures. The rank and file personnel were going about their normal routines. Even General Vance seemed unaware that her warnings about complacency had been prophetic. The next morning brought news that confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Corporal Torres informed her that the system upgrade in the command center was being extended for another week, and that several more areas of the base would be getting similar upgrades. They're bringing in more contractors? Sarah asked. Yeah, some big computer company from back east. Supposed to be updating all our networks to the latest security standards. Sarah nodded and mumbled something appropriate, but her mind was racing. If more contractors were coming, it could mean that the operation was expanding or that the initial team needed reinforcement. Either way, it suggested that whatever was planned was much larger than a simple cyber attack. As she went about her cleaning routine that day, Sarah found herself looking at the base with new eyes. She saw potential attack routes, identified critical vulnerabilities, and recognized how thoroughly her 3 years of intelligence gathering had mapped out every detail that an attacking force would need. She had become an expert on Desert Mountain's defenses by learning to be invisible within them. Now that expertise was being used against the very people who had made her invisibility possible through their casual dismissal and mockery. The irony was bitter. The same soldiers who joked about her inability to speak English had no idea that she was multilingual. The same officers who dismissed her as too stupid to be a threat were unaware that she had advanced degrees in the exact skills needed to compromise their systems. The same security personnel who waved her through checkpoints without a second thought had given her access to information that was now being used to plan an attack against them. But Sarah was no longer the invisible cleaning lady they thought they knew. She had become something much more dangerous, a double agent with intimate knowledge of both the target and the attack plan. The question now was whether she could use that knowledge to protect the people who had spent 3 years treating her like she didn't exist. As the weekend approached, Sarah prepared for what she suspected would be the most crucial phase of her mission. According to the intelligence requests she was receiving, the operation was scheduled to begin the following week. She had perhaps 7 days to help the FBI identify and stop an attack that she had inadvertently helped plan. The woman they called Mute Girl was about to find her voice in the most dramatic way possible. Monday morning arrived with an ominous stillness that made Sarah's skin crawl. As she entered the base for what might be her final day as the invisible cleaning lady, she could feel the weight of impending crisis pressing down on everything around her. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came when she noticed that several of the regular security guards had been replaced with unfamiliar faces. Corporal Torres, who had been waving her through checkpoints for 3 years, was nowhere to be seen. In his place stood a stern-faced man who examined her ID badge with suspicious intensity. "Name and purpose," he demanded, even though her cleaning uniform and cart should have made her purpose obvious. "Sarah Martinez," she replied in her practiced, timid voice. "I clean offices and computers." The guard studied her for a long moment before finally opening the checkpoint door. "Stay in designated areas only. No deviations from your normal route." As Sarah pushed her cart through the corridors, she noticed other changes that made her increasingly nervous. Maintenance personnel she had never seen before were working throughout the base, installing what appeared to be new communication equipment. Several office areas had been cordoned off with authorized personnel-only signs. Most disturbing of all, the command and control center was completely sealed off. Not even cleaning personnel were being allowed near the area, and Sarah could see armed guards stationed outside the entrances. She made her way to her first scheduled cleaning area, the administrative offices, while her mind raced through the implications of what she was observing. The base was clearly being prepared for something significant, but the preparations were being conducted by people who weren't part of the normal command structure. As she cleaned Colonel Harrison's office, Sarah overheard a heated phone conversation that confirmed her worst suspicions. "I don't care what the orders say," Harrison was shouting into his secure phone. "I want to know who authorized these contractors and why I wasn't informed about this operation. Half my security team has been reassigned without explanation, and there are people working in my command center that I've never seen before." There was a pause as Harrison listened to the response, and Sarah could see his expression growing darker. "That's impossible. General Vance is in Washington for the Defense Appropriations hearing. She's been gone for 3 days. Who exactly gave you her authorization?" Sarah's blood ran cold. If General Vance had been in Washington for 3 days, then whoever was coordinating the contractor activities was using forged authorization. The operation was not only underway, but had successfully infiltrated the base's command structure. Harrison ended his call and immediately placed another one. "Give me the FBI field office in Las Vegas. This is a priority security alert." For a moment, Sarah felt a surge of hope. Harrison was finally recognizing that something was wrong and was reaching out for help. But her relief was short-lived as she watched Harrison's expression change from determination to confusion to alarm. "What do you mean the phone lines are down?" All of them. What about radio communication? Harrison tried several different communication devices, but it was clear that the base had been cut off from outside contact. Whatever operation was underway, it had been designed to isolate Desert Mountain from any potential help. As Harrison continued his futile attempts to reach the outside world, Sarah quietly finished cleaning his office and moved on to her next scheduled area. But her mind was no longer focused on maintaining her cover. She was beginning to understand the scope of what was happening, and it was far worse than anything she had imagined. The foreign agents weren't just planning to attack the base. They were taking it over entirely, using the intelligence Sarah had provided to infiltrate and control key systems before anyone realized what was happening. The contractors weren't updating security systems. They were installing equipment to replace those systems with ones under foreign control. Sarah needed to contact Agent Kim immediately, but when she tried to use her secure communication device, she discovered that it was no longer functioning. The signal jammers that had been installed throughout the base were blocking all unauthorized communications. She was on her own. As the morning progressed, Sarah watched the base gradually transform around her. More contractors arrived and began working in critical areas. Regular military personnel were being systematically reassigned to areas away from important systems. Key officers were being called to meetings that took them out of their normal command positions. It was a masterpiece of strategic deception, and Sarah realized with growing horror that her 3 years of intelligence gathering had provided the detailed knowledge necessary to make it work. Every security protocol, every personnel routine, every system vulnerability she had documented was being exploited with surgical precision. By lunchtime, the transformation was nearly complete. The base still looked normal on the surface, but Sarah could see that effective control had shifted to the infiltrators. They now had access to communications, security systems, and command facilities while the legitimate military personnel remained unaware of what had happened. But Sarah also realized something that the infiltrators didn't know. She was still free to move throughout the base, and she still had access to systems that even they might not have considered. The emergency shutdown protocol that she had provided intelligence about was designed to be activated only in extreme circumstances. But Sarah had memorized the real codes, not the modified ones she had transmitted to her handlers. If she could reach the manual activation panel, she could potentially shut down all base systems and force an evacuation that would expose the infiltration. The problem was that the manual activation panel was located in the command and control center, which was now under complete enemy control. Getting to it would require her to penetrate the most heavily guarded area on the base while maintaining her cover as a harmless cleaning lady. As she considered her options, Sarah remembered something from her technical training at MIT. The emergency shutdown protocol had a backup activation system that could be triggered from the base's engineering control room. It was designed as a failsafe in case the primary command center was compromised, which was exactly the current situation. The engineering control room was located in the underground levels of the base, accessible through the tunnel system that Sarah knew intimately. Even better, it was an area that cleaning personnel visited regularly for maintenance purposes, so her presence there wouldn't automatically raise suspicion. But accessing the shutdown system would require her to abandon her cover entirely. Once she activated the protocol, there would be no hiding her true identity or capabilities. She would be revealing herself as either a legitimate intelligence agent or a foreign spy, and given the current situation, the infiltrators might not wait to sort out which one. As Sarah weighed her options, she received a piece of information that made her decision inevitable. While cleaning near a group of contractors, she overheard them discussing their timeline for the operation. Phase 3 begins at 1800 hours, one of them said in lightly accented English. All defensive systems will be offline by then, and the transport aircraft will have a clear approach corridor. What about the personnel? Non-essential personnel will be contained in designated areas. Essential personnel will be detained for questioning about weapons systems and classified programs. And after we have the information, the base will be destroyed to eliminate evidence. Satellite imaging will show it as an unfortunate accident during a training exercise. The casual way they discussed mass murder made Sarah's stomach turn, but it also crystallized her resolve. These weren't just foreign agents conducting espionage. They were planning to kill everyone on the base after extracting military secrets. Sarah looked around at the familiar faces of people who had spent 3 years mocking her, dismissing her, and treating her like she was invisible. Sergeant Rodriguez, who called her Mute Girl, was sitting at his desk completely unaware that his life was in danger. The technicians who joked about her inability to speak English were continuing their normal routines while enemies moved freely around them. These people had never shown her respect or kindness, but they didn't deserve to die because of intelligence she had unknowingly provided to their killers. Sarah made her decision. She was going to shut down the base, expose the infiltration, and save the lives of people who had never appreciated her existence. The invisible cleaning lady was about to become the most important person on Desert Mountain Air Force Base. But first, she needed to get to the engineering control room without arousing suspicion. That meant maintaining her cover for a few more hours while secretly preparing to reveal capabilities that would shock everyone who had ever underestimated her. As she continued her cleaning routine, Sarah began mentally preparing for what would likely be the most dangerous afternoon of her life. She reviewed the tunnel routes, considered potential obstacles, and planned her approach to the emergency shutdown system. But, most importantly, she prepared to finally break her 3 years of silence in a way that would ensure no one ever underestimated her again. The woman they had mocked for her inability to speak was about to deliver a message that would save their lives, even if it meant destroying her own carefully constructed identity in the process. Time was running out, and Sarah Martinez had work to do. By 2 p.m., Sarah had positioned herself in the lower levels of the base under the pretense of cleaning maintenance areas. The corridors here were less heavily monitored, and the sound of machinery provided cover for her movements as she made her way toward the tunnel access points. As she worked, she continued to observe the infiltrators' preparations. They were clearly operating on a precise timeline, and everything she saw confirmed that the attack was scheduled for 6 p.m., just 4 hours away. She had 4 hours to reach the engineering control room, activate the emergency shutdown protocol, and alert legitimate military personnel about what was happening. It would be the most challenging mission of her career, and failure would mean the death of everyone on the base. But for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Martinez wasn't pretending to be someone else. She was exactly who she needed to be, a highly trained intelligence agent with the skills and knowledge necessary to save the day. The only question was whether the people she was about to save would understand what she had done for them, or whether they would see her as just another enemy agent to be eliminated. Either way, the time for silence was over. At exactly 3:17 p.m., Sarah Martinez disappeared. She left her cleaning cart in a maintenance corridor, shed her janitor's uniform to reveal the tactical clothing she had been wearing underneath, and stepped into the tunnel system that honeycombed beneath Desert Mountain Air Force Base. For the first time in 3 years, she moved with the confident precision of the MIT-trained intelligence operative she had always been. The tunnels were exactly as she remembered them from her mental maps. Her photographic memory guided her through the maze of underground passages that connected critical facilities throughout the base. As she moved, she could hear the muffled sounds of activity above her, the normal bustle of a military base that had no idea it was being systematically compromised. Sarah reached the engineering control room at 3:45 p.m., giving her just over 2 hours before the infiltrators' timeline called for the base's destruction. The control room was protected by biometric scanners and security codes that would have stopped most intruders, but Sarah had been observing these systems for 3 years. She used maintenance codes she had memorized from watching technicians, combined with a biometric spoof device that Agent Kim had provided for emergencies. Within minutes, she was standing in front of the emergency shutdown protocol console, staring at the system that could save everyone on the base. But as Sarah prepared to activate the shutdown sequence, she hesitated. Once she input the codes, every system on the base would lock down. Communications would be severed, defensive systems would go offline, and evacuation procedures would automatically begin. It would expose the infiltration, but it would also reveal her own identity to everyone involved. More importantly, she realized that simply shutting down the base wouldn't be enough. The infiltrators had already demonstrated that they could forge authorization and manipulate personnel. A temporary shutdown might only delay their plans rather than stop them entirely. Sarah needed to do more than just activate the emergency shutdown protocol. She needed to gather evidence of the infiltration and transmit it to outside authorities who could respond appropriately. But that would require accessing the base's communication systems before shutting them down. She made a decision that would have terrified the timid cleaning lady but felt natural to the intelligence operative. She was going to infiltrate the command and control center that was now under enemy control. Using her knowledge of the tunnel system, Sarah made her way to an access point that emerged in a maintenance area adjacent to the command center. She could hear voices through the walls, speaking in what she recognized as Russian mixed with accented English. Through a ventilation grate, she could see into the command center itself. The familiar room was now filled with foreign operatives working at computer terminals that had been modified with additional equipment. They had indeed taken complete control of the base's central nervous system. But what Sarah saw next made her blood run cold. On one of the large display screens, she could see a countdown timer showing 1 hour and 47 minutes. Below the timer was a schematic of the base with areas marked in red. The infiltrators weren't just planning to extract information and destroy the base. They were planning to detonate explosives in specific locations that would maximize casualties. Sarah realized that the contractors, who had been installing equipment throughout the base, had actually been placing explosive devices in critical areas. The attack wasn't scheduled for 6 p.m., it was scheduled for 5:30 p.m., and it was going to be devastating. She also saw something else that made her decision inevitable. Agent Kim was in the room, but he wasn't there as FBI backup. He was clearly working with the infiltrators, coordinating their activities with the knowledge he had gained from her FBI cooperation. The man she had trusted to help stop the attack had been an enemy agent all along. Her FBI contact had been another layer of deception, designed to keep her under control while the infiltrators completed their preparations. Sarah was truly alone, with less than 2 hours to stop an attack that would kill hundreds of people. But as she watched the activity in the command center, Sarah noticed something the infiltrators had overlooked. In their focus on controlling the base's computer systems, they had dismissed the manual override capabilities that existed in older equipment. The emergency shutdown protocol could be activated from the command center itself using a manual switch that didn't depend on computer authorization. The switch was located behind a panel marked Emergency Use Only, and it would require someone to physically access the command center to activate it. But once activated, it would immediately lock down all base systems and trigger evacuation alarms that couldn't be overridden remotely. Sarah studied the layout of the room and the positions of the infiltrators. There were 8 people in the command center, all focused on their computer screens. The manual override switch was located on the far side of the room, near the main display screens. Getting to it would require crossing an open area where she would be clearly visible to everyone in the room. Once she reached the switch, she would have perhaps 30 seconds to activate the shutdown sequence before the infiltrators could stop her. It would be suicide mission, but it was the only way to save the base. At 4:15 p.m., Sarah began her final approach. She removed the ventilation grate as quietly as possible and lowered herself into the command center through the ceiling access point. The infiltrators were so focused on their preparations that none of them noticed the slight movement above their heads. Sarah dropped silently behind a bank of computer equipment and began making her way across the room, staying low and moving between workstations. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady as she drew closer to the emergency override panel. She was 10 feet from her target when everything went wrong. Agent Martinez, came a familiar voice from behind her. I was wondering when you would finally make your move. Sarah turned to see Agent Kim pointing a weapon at her, his expression cold and professional. You really thought we didn't know you were here? We've been tracking your movements since you entered the tunnels. The other infiltrators had stopped their work and were now watching the confrontation with interest. Sarah realized that she had walked into a trap, but she was still close enough to the emergency override to make one last attempt. Don't even think about it, Kim said. You're going to step away from that panel and sit down quietly while we finish our work. Why? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Why betray your own country? Kim laughed. My own country? Agent Martinez, I was never working for the United States. The FBI credentials were as fake as your CIA extraction that never came. We've been running this operation for 5 years, and you were just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The people on this base don't deserve to die for your operation. The people on this base represent the military-industrial complex that has oppressed the world for decades. Their sacrifice will serve a greater cause. As Kim spoke, Sarah noticed that his attention was focused entirely on her, and the other infiltrators had returned to their work. The countdown timer now showed 1 hour and 3 minutes, and she could see additional displays indicating that transport aircraft were approaching the base perimeter. Sarah realized that Kim was stalling, keeping her talking while the final preparations were completed. In a few minutes, it would be too late to stop the attack even if she could reach the override switch. She had one chance, and it required her to do something that the timid cleaning lady would never have been capable of. You know what, Agent Kim? Sarah said, her voice suddenly clear and confident. I have something to tell you about the intelligence I've been providing. What's that? Every single piece of critical information I gave you over the past 8 months was deliberately modified. The access codes are wrong. The tunnel layouts lead to dead ends. The security protocols I described don't actually exist. Kim's expression changed from smugness to confusion to anger as Sarah continued. I knew you weren't really CIA from our second communication. Real CIA handlers would never have requested the specific information you were asking for. So I fed you exactly what I thought you wanted to hear while gathering intelligence on your operation. That's impossible. We tested the information. The codes worked. Some of them worked because I needed you to trust me. But the critical systems? The ones you're planning to use for your attack? Those codes will trigger security lockdowns the moment you try to use them. Sarah could see doubt creeping into Kim's expression, and she pressed her advantage. In fact, the emergency override system you're standing next to? It's not actually connected to the base's main systems. The real override is in the engineering control room, which I activated 20 minutes ago. It was a complete bluff, but it had the desired effect. Kim turned his head slightly to look at the control panel, and Sarah used that moment of distraction to dive toward the emergency override switch. She reached the panel as Kim spun back toward her, his weapon aimed at her center mass. But Sarah had already grasped the manual override lever, and she yanked it down with all her strength just as Kim pulled the trigger. The bullet caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around, and sending her crashing into the main display screens. But the override switch had been activated, and immediately the command center erupted in alarms and flashing emergency lights. Throughout the base, loudspeakers began broadcasting evacuation orders in English, Spanish, and Russian. Security lockdown procedures activated automatically, sealing critical areas and preventing unauthorized access. Communication systems that had been compromised were immediately switched to secure backup channels that connected directly to external military commands. Most importantly, the explosives that had been placed throughout the base were automatically detected and isolated by emergency protocols that Sarah had helped activate. As Sarah lay bleeding on the floor of the command center, she could see the infiltrators frantically trying to regain control of systems that were no longer responding to their commands. Their carefully planned operation was collapsing around them as legitimate military personnel throughout the base began responding to the emergency alerts. Kim stood over her, his weapon still aimed at her chest, but his expression had changed from confidence to desperate anger. You have no idea what you've done, he said. This operation took years to plan. You've destroyed something that was bigger than just this base. Good, Sarah replied, her voice weak but defiant. That was the point. Kim raised his weapon to finish her, but the command center doors burst open as legitimate base security personnel flooded in. The infiltrators were surrounded within seconds, their weapons confiscated, and their carefully constructed operation dismantled in real time. As medics worked to stabilize Sarah's injuries, she could hear Colonel Harrison's voice over the emergency communication system, coordinating with outside military commands and FBI units that were now responding to the base's distress signals. This is Colonel Harrison at Desert Mountain Air Force Base. We have successfully repelled a foreign infiltration attempt. The base is secure, and we are detaining multiple enemy agents. We also have a friendly agent who requires immediate medical attention. Through her pain and exhaustion, Sarah smiled at Harrison's description of her as a friendly agent. After 3 years of being called Mute Girl and being treated like she was invisible, she had finally earned the recognition she deserved. But more importantly, she had saved the lives of hundreds of people who had never appreciated her existence. The soldiers who had mocked her silence were alive because she had finally chosen to speak. The officers who had dismissed her as harmless were safe because she had proven just how dangerous she could be when necessary. As Sarah was loaded onto a stretcher and prepared for transport to the base medical facility, she caught sight of Sergeant Rodriguez standing in the corridor. He was staring at her with an expression of complete shock, clearly struggling to reconcile the injured intelligence agent on the stretcher with the timid cleaning lady he had known for 3 years. "Ma'am," he said quietly as the stretcher passed him. I'm sorry for how we treated you." Sarah looked up at him and smiled. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said in perfect, unaccented English, "apology accepted." As they wheeled her away, Sarah could hear the sounds of the base returning to normal operations. The emergency had passed, the infiltrators had been captured, and the attack had been prevented. She had accomplished her mission, even though it had taken 3 years longer than anyone had planned. But, most importantly, she had proven that the quietest person in the room could indeed be the most dangerous one of all. The woman they had mocked for her silence had found her voice when it mattered most, and that voice had saved them all. The invisible cleaning lady was invisible no more, and Desert Mountain Air Force Base would never underestimate anyone again. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's story would become legend throughout the military intelligence community. The agent who had maintained deep cover for 3 years while being dismissed and mocked by the very people she was protecting would be held up as an example of dedication and professionalism under the most challenging circumstances. But, for Sarah, the real victory wasn't the commendations or the recognition that would follow. It was the simple fact that when the moment came to choose between her own safety and the lives of people who had never shown her respect, she had chosen to act. After 3 years of silence, she had finally spoken, and her voice had been heard by everyone who mattered.